Hi guys, so I just want to maybe give you some pointers and tips for the chemistry exam next Tuesday. Um, so this year it's answer any 6 questions, which is a nice little bonus, gives you a little bit of extra time, 50 marks each, 30 minutes per question. And I would recommend that you decide on your top 6 questions and focus in on those. Make sure you do those well, and have your extra questions then on top of those. Don't be kind of, overdoing it with 8 top questions, whatever. Decide on your top 6, know those well, and then have your backups as well. Okay. So just going to go through tips for each question, maybe look at what's come up in past years. Now, don't use this to, as predictions, just maybe to focus yourself a little bit on certain topics, looking at previous exam questions, and hopefully it'll be add some bit of focus to your revision. Okay, so question 1 is usually the titration. These aren't set in stone, but usually it's a titration or volumetric analysis, as in, well, the first 3 are your experiments. The order is usually this, but don't be put off if they change it around. So our titration, there's 3 parts for titration. Usually there's the procedural part, using your burette, using your pipette and all that kind of stuff. That's the same pretty much for the most part for every titration, maybe small variations. There's the question which are unique to the given titration, whether that be the indicator, color changes, just the chemistry stuff about like potassium permanganate and so on. Okay. And then obviously you have your calculations, a lot of similarities between all the calculations, but then some differences as well. So there's some stuff, the procedure and parts of the calculations, that are the same no matter what the titration, but obviously then there's unique parts to each titration. So this is what has come up in the last 10 years of them all listed there. So we saw 2020 was water crystallization. We had water ones in 19 and 18. Before that, then we had the standardization of KMNO4. Then we had vinegar before that, and before that you had iodine versus sodium thiosulfate. So if I was to say which ones are likely, I would think probably what's likely is a redox titration. So that's any of the sodium thiosulfate or the potassium permanganate ones. So could be the iron tablet one, could be the bleach one. They're the most likely ones, but I wouldn't rule out like vinegar. I wouldn't ignore that. That hasn't come up since 2016. There was a acid base one last year, so it's less likely to be acid base. Doesn't mean it isn't going to be. So if I was to pick my top tips, it would be redox, one of the bleach or sodium thiosulfate standardization, or iron tablet or KMNO4 standardization, and beyond that, maybe vinegar. Okay. Question 2 is usually the organic chemistry, the organic experiment. Okay. Again, there's generally 3 parts to the organic: the procedure, which is a kind of a big part of it. There's a lot of procedural stuff asked here. There's diagrams can come up in organic, which is one that you can maybe neglect a little bit. Small few calculations and the equations as well then of your the reaction that takes place in your organic experiment. Okay, so that's the 3 parts of those. Very difficult to predict what's coming up in organic. There hasn't really been much of a pattern in recent years. Okay, it also can come up in the main section. So with organic, just know them. Okay, these are the ones that have come up in recent years. Phenylmethanol come up last year, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there. Before that, we had a mixture of stuff: ethanoic acid, ethanol, preparation of ethene. Before that, you had another mixture of stuff, like part of the soap, part of the clove oil, recrystallization of benzoic acid. Before that, we had ethene and ethyne, and we had oxidation of phenylmethanol in the main section. We had a mixture before that. So it's been a bit all over the place, really. So anything can come up. It's really difficult to predict. Soap as a standalone one hasn't come up since 2014. So possibly soap, okay, would be one that I could say hasn't come up in a while as a full question. However, it did come in 2018, as part of the question. So again, it is difficult with the organic. I always say to my students in organic, just learn them. Just if you're doing the organic experiment, learn them all, and it might get you a half question in the main section as well, So I think that's the best route to go with the organic. Okay, and they're fairly straightforward, most of them. Okay. Question 3 is, our other experiment usually rates of reactions are one of the others. Okay. So definitely know the rates of reaction because they're grand. You know, they're experiments that are easy enough to cover, and they can come up in the main section as well. Okay, and that rate of reaction question is a fine one to do. Okay, these are what has come up recently. So there was rate of reaction last year in 2020. Before that, we'd relative molecular mass of a volatile liquid, rate of reaction, and before that, you the free chlorine and the suspended solids, rate of reaction, volatile liquid, and so on. Okay, so rate of reaction obviously is a possibility every year. What hasn't come up in a while, well, since 2015, there we haven't had those other water ones, which are free chlorine and the suspended solids and dissolved solids in water. What also hasn't come up since, and it's not listed there, it's 2009, is flame tests and the ion tests. So it's maybe a possibility that might cause you to say, no chance. I know some people don't like those, but it is a possibility. And if you spend a bit of time on the flame tests and ion tests, they're actually grand. Okay. There's nothing major to them. There's a few equations in there that you need to learn off, but that's about the most difficult thing about them. But obviously, I would say definitely know your rate of reaction. If that comes up here, fantastic. And those two water ones from 2015 are very straightforward as well. Okay. So that's our experiments. All right. Question 4 is next. Question 4 is just a mishmash of the whole course. Short questions, you do 8 of them. Okay. What's commonly asked is definitions. In particular, the gas laws are quite often asked. There's always a little bit of stoichiometry in there. And really, it's just a variety from across the course. They could ask you some organic structures. They could ask you a little bit about water. They could ask you some radioactivity. They can ask you conjugate acid-base pairs is another common enough one actually in there that I didn't mention. So it's quite a bit. I would always say have question 4 as your extra question. Don't be depending on it because it's so hard to know. Some years it can be grand and very straightforward. Other years it can be very difficult. So if you want an extra question, let question 4 be one of your extra questions. Okay, because like I said, you could fly through it, do fantastically well, get full marks, or you could mess up 2 questions, and it can be marked quite strictly too. You can have a question which is like all or nothing, so 6 marks or 0 marks, or more. Sometimes they're split into 2, 3, and 3. Okay, but like you could do it, get 2 slightly wrong, and you've lost 12 marks straight away. So extra question, I would say. Definition is very important, stoichiometry important, and just it's a variety of stuff. Okay. And also, if you're picking and choosing a bit more, maybe leaving out equilibrium or something, that could cost you question 4 too, which is why I always say use it as your extra question. Okay. All right, let's move on. Question 5 is generally atomic theory, periodic table, radioactivity, bonding, a mixture of those things. Okay. So what's come up in recent years? Well, last year was Bohr and trends within groups. 2019, history of periodic table, atomic number, relative molecular mass, trends, reactivity of group 1. 2018, there was a bit of radioactivity in there, mass spectrometry. 2017, atomic orbitals, the SP configuration, trends. Then we Bohr the year before that. So you can see the kind of stuff that comes up there. Bonding has really moved away from this question in recent years. Doesn't mean it's not going to come up in it, but more recently, bonding has been in question 10 and 11. Okay. But what hasn't come up in a while, which could be worth focusing on for this year, again, not a prediction, just some things to keep an eye on. SP configuration, which is grand. Okay. History of the atom hasn't come up in a little bit. That's pretty straightforward. You just have your scientists, what they did. And then trends hasn't come up. It's come up trends within groups, kind of smaller questions, but there hasn't been a decent trends part of question 5 since 2017 probably. Okay, so there are ones just to keep an eye on for question 5 if you're planning on doing it. Question 6, fuels and heats of reaction. Generally speaking, this is what question 6 is. Question that a lot of people do, so it's pretty well answered as well. So it's one that you need to answer pretty well to get the marks, because there'll be a lot of competition given a lot of people are doing it and tend to do well in it. Okay, so this is our fuels and heats. This is what has come up in the last few years. So catalytic cracking came up last year, oxygenates, and you also have your thermochemistry calculation. 2019 was isomers, octane number, catalytic cracking. combustion calculation the year before, you'd liquid petroleum gas, you'd refractions, you'd mercaptans, combustion calculation, boiling points. So there's been a bit of bonding coming in here of recently as well. Okay, so what hasn't come up in a while? Bomb calorimeter hasn't come up in quite a while. Could be one to watch out for, but it hasn't come up in ages, so maybe it's not going to come up. But still, it's an easy enough one that wouldn't take you long to go over. Mercaptans hasn't come up in a bit. That's a tiny little part, but just make sure you know those. And fractional distillation hasn't come up in a little bit, and maybe the diagram for that. They're just little bits and pieces to look out for. There's a lot more going to be in there. You obviously have your, your hydrocarbons and your alkanes and alkenes, that the basics kind of that come up all the time, your fractions, and all that. But they're just three little things that haven't come up in a while that maybe could come up as a part of the question, not the whole question, if that makes sense. Okay. Question 7. Okay, so question 7, question 9, they're kind of difficult to know what will come up. This is what has come up in recent years. 2020 and 2019 were acid base and pH. 2018 was rate of reaction, okay, where you had graph, you had a theory, you had reaction profile diagram. The 2 years before that were equilibrium, you had rate of reaction again. So in the pre that I put together, I put rate of reaction as my question 7, okay. So I think rate of reaction is due to come up as a full question this year. If it's not question 3, I think it'd probably be a full question in section B. Okay, well, what was section B, which is now just question 7. So look out for rate of reactions here. So what's important in rate of reactions? You have your graphs, all a very, very important part of rate of reaction. Make sure you're drawing those and getting all the marks that are available there. You have the mandatory and non-mandatory experiments. So there is some non-mandatory experiments in rates of reactions that tend to get asked. You have diagrams. You can ask me to draw diagrams in rate of reactions. Okay. So I do think rate of reaction is a possibility as a full question in the main section. Okay. Question 8 is your organic reactions. Again, some people love this, some people really dislike it. So this is really, there's a mix of whether people do this or not. If you do it, this is what, again, has come up in the last few years. Last year was aldehydes, alcohols, PVC, ionic addition mechanism. The year before you had alcohols, you had esters. The year before you had alkanes, alcohols, aldehydes. And you can see the mix there. Alcohols is a very popular one that comes up. Okay, again, there's been a bit more bonding coming into organic of late. Okay, you can see that in 2019 and 2018. Okay, esters has been asked a bit more of late. So again, when I was setting the pre myself, what did I put in here? I put it in alkanes, alkenes, ketones, the test to distinguish between ketones and aldehydes. These are just little things that maybe haven't come up in a couple of years in this question. Again, just maybe pay a little bit of extra attention to these as well as everything else. Don't be saying this is what's coming up in question 8. I'm only studying this. Do not do that. That would be a big mistake. Okay, but they're just maybe things to look out for. So the test to distinguish between ketones and aldehydes, you have your Failings solution of your silver-Mayer test, and you have they're the 2 ones really to focus on. I wouldn't really use the acidified potassium permanganate in that. I would learn the others 2 well and make sure you know the procedure and the chemicals used and the color changes and all that. Okay. Question 9 again, that this can be changed from year to year. So 2020 was equilibrium, 2019 rates of reaction, 2018 equilibrium, acid base pH. 2016 was BOD and a bit of water in there. Okay, so I think this year there'll possibly be a bit of water in there. pH and indicators, maybe a bit of acid base. Okay, so yeah, I would think there's going to be some bit of a water question in what was the main section, but beyond the experiments. Okay, so look out for that. Now, unless question 3 is the water, the other water experiments, then possibly not. But I think definitely know your water, know your pH and indicator calculations. And if it comes up, it's a nice question, as long as you have your calculations sorted, and they're not that difficult, really, the pH calculations as calculations go. Okay. Again, just certainly not a guarantee, and don't be depending on it, but one to look out for and put a bit of time into. Okay. Question 10. So those 3 parts, answer 2 of them, 25 marks each. Okay, what has come up in recent years? 2020 was BOD, water, so there was just a half question in water last year. Redox and stoichiometry. 2019, free radical mechanism, Bohr, stoichiometry, 2018 on saturation, benzene properties and bonding, boron stoichiometry, and so on. Okay. Now, again, in the pre I put together, I put stoichiometry, radioactivity. Now I put in redox, even though it came up last year. Okay, so maybe not. Okay, but if balancing redox reactions comes up, it's a very nice one. So it's well worth knowing anyway. Radioactivity, lovely question. That would be very nice. And obviously stoichiometry depends on how good or bad your stoichiometry is. But you can see the type of stuff that comes up there. Okay. Um, and it's there could be some more organic possibly. So if you're good at organic, that's great. In 2019, there was a free radical mechanism, so maybe that's a possibility. And that's, I mean, that's just a guess for me, really, looking at what has come up in recent years. But stoichiometry does come up pretty regularly. Radioactivity is one that has come up regularly enough. It last came up in 2017 in this section, so that's probably why I put it into my own pre that I put together. Okay. And then question 11, a little bit different this year than previous years in that there is 3 parts. The option, which was a part of the examiner, well, it's still on the course, but they're not testing it this year. That's not there anymore. So there'll be 3 questions. It'll be very similar to question 10. So all the years looking back, I've only 2 parts in there because the 3rd part would have been the option, which again isn't on the test this year. So bonding has come up very often. So I would say, yeah, probably going to be bonding again, unless they're been, changing things up, something fierce, but there's been bonding most years, well, every year since 2014 in question 11. Okay, other things, equilibrium, bit of water, bit of organic, actually. Actually, the liquefying air and the environmental and all, that's the option. Okay, so it's the other stuff that you look at, the stoichiometry, bonding in 2017, stoichiometry, bonding 2016, bonding in equilibrium 2015, bonding in stoichiometry. So it tends to have been bonding and some calculation. So I put bonding, I put equilibrium, a calculation, and I said, right, what else? Maybe an organic experiment. Okay, that's what I did for my own pre, it could be anything in there really, but that's another thing that could possibly, which would be nice if you learn the organic experiments. Here's another half question for you. Happy out. Okay. So look, that's just hopefully some bit of help to focus you in your study. Please do not be depending on these as predictions are, definitely going to come up. Just a bit of focus to what you study and maybe a little bit of a help in the days leading up to exam. And all the best in the test. I hope it goes really well for you. Okay.